Father in heaven, we come to you, Lord, for strength, for wisdom, for understanding, for discernment, Father, for courage. We see, Father, that there are many issues at hand that each need to be taken and understood. We look back, Father, at Gideon's army and how you sorted out the different people. We know, Lord, the decision was made based on how they drank their water. We know that the rain is water, and we are in the time period of the latter rain. And we know that there are reasons that some people can't partake as much as others. But we pray, Father, for each and every one of us here, present, online, and those around the world, that we would do all we could to partake of the rain, all within our capabilities, Lord, that if there's anything that's hindering us from partaking of the rain, we might find ourselves falling behind. So we know, Father, that it was determined by how we drank our rain. We just pray that you would help us, give us wisdom and godly counsel on these matters, Lord, that we all be firmly united, knit together in heart and mind with you, Lord. As we open up this next study and continue through, Father, the understanding, greater understanding bit by bit of this midnight cry message, we pray for an outpouring of your Holy Spirit, that you would make our minds ready and quick, able to understand. And that we might leave here today, Father, with a greater understanding as we continue to proceed on this. We thank you for the blessing and the privilege of being able to gather together as we do. And I pray, Father, to be worthy of this high calling for each and every one of us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Amen. Okay, let me get the notes up there.
Oh, wait, hold on, sorry. How come it's so
Did you
big?
get it?
You have to take your volume all the way down and mute yourself. You have to do both.
There we go. Yeah,
And the
I
mic
know.
off too? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
but the screen just went big screen, so I wasn't able to get to my
Yeah.
thing.
So we're going to go through this one, and it is one of the shorter presentations. So I'm kind of hoping, since we put a 2-hour block in each one of our studies, that we might be able to go from this to another immediately, so that we stay on schedule. For those that join us in the afternoon, that we don't, somebody brought that up before, that we don't wind up stopping in other times. That if we get through this one, we're going to go into a slideshow on equality that I was working on yesterday. And so.
I thought that was.
Huh?
Okay.
What? Do you have a problem? Is it?
No, I thought that was the notes for Sister Lana's last night. I still don't have them.
Oh, no. Okay. Oh, you don't have the equality? It's in your email.
I have the equality. I don't have Sister Lana's notes for last night.
Oh, they were emailed out last night too.
Okay.
It was ALPS
Do I
number
have
12.
those notes? Do everybody have
They were
those
attached on the email last night.
notes?
Okay.
Okay. Do
So
everyone have those notes?
I emailed them last night. Yeah. I emailed them all last night. You're talking about the last night's notes, right?
No, the notes on equality.
Yeah, they're in the email. They're all in the email. Okay. So we've been studying.
There's 2 different ones on equality. One's Elaine's and one's Sister Lana's.
No, one was just the Word document and one's the slideshow.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. We've been studying the King of the South and see that the King of the South, he comes in 2 histories. And what have we been calling these 2 histories?
Alpha and Omega.
The Alpha and the Omega. And what Alpha history have we been studying?
Of Pyrrhus?
Pyrrhus in Macedonia, and the Omega is Pyrrhus in Italy. We can divide it into two parts, or we can say that this is the one history of Pyrrhus. The whole thing is one history of Pyrrhus, or we can divide it into two parts. We could just see that it's one long history, but it's all Pyrrhus's life, or the life of the king of the south. When we come to the king of the south, and just a quick reference, why do we call him the king of the south? To be a king of the south, there has to be a king of the north, right? So how are we able to say that he's the king of the south?
Because Rome is the king of the north.
Because Rome is the king of the north.
And Demetrius is
And Demetrius, yeah. So when we come to the king of the south in our time, we have another long history. Where does the king of the south begin in our history? It begins in World War II. We can see that it comes to life in the Bolshevik Revolution. We first see it interact in world affairs in the Spanish Civil War, which ends in 1939. And this is where we're marking World War II coming in. When we're speaking about the king of the north and the king of the south, we mark 1939. So the king of the south began, but he doesn't come into world affairs right away. We can see it comes in an alpha history because that history of Stalin ends. We know the king of the south dies, so what must happen? So if the king of the south dies, the king of the south must resurrect. And we went through that in other studies. And we'll have an omega history. So the alpha is the history of World War II, and the omega is the history. She didn't call it World War III. She said she'd call it that just for lack of a better word. I guess we don't know what to call it, but we are looking at World War III. So we're in the omega history. This is what we've been studying: Macedonia and World War II, and Italy and World War III. We could see it as one long history, but that we're preparing to do what we're doing is cutting the line and overlaying them. The alpha history typifies the omega history. Not only can the history of Macedonia show us what World War II looks like, but also Macedonia and World War II can show us what World War III looks like. So what we've done on our board is cut the lines and brought the omega under our alpha histories. We've done Macedonia, Pyrrhus' alpha, and his omega, Italy. Then we have the alpha, World War II, and the omega, World War III. So we've got Macedonia, Pyrrhus in two parts. It's either one big long line, his life, but it comes in two parts. It's split between the alpha and the omega. Then this is the king of the south. Then you have the king of the south here in an alpha and omega history. So what we've done is cut the line and bring them down and stack them all on top of each other. So we have Pyrrhus' alpha, Pyrrhus' omega, and then the king of the south, Stalin, as the alpha, and Putin as the omega. Everybody follow that so far?
Sorry, sister. I was a little distracted.
So we're going to do a quick review on Pyrrhus in Italy. One detail that we need to mention on World War II, when we considered that line, we understand that Stalin in the Soviet Union represented the king of the south, and Hitler and Nazi Germany, the king of the north. One piece of information that is helpful as we're considering Germany is the king of the north. You can see Germany comes in four parts. Germany as a nation was first unified in 1871 by a man called Bismarck. So this is known as Germany under Bismarck. He unified the country. He essentially ran it. This is the first phase of Germany's life as a nation. 1871 to 1890 is the new German Empire under Bismarck. The second phase of the German Empire is 1890 to 1918. 1918 is the end of the First World War, and there's a new Kaiser, Kaiser Wilhelm. As he comes into power, he is not willing to share control of the country with Bismarck. This king does not want a competitive government, so he forces Bismarck to resign, and Kaiser Wilhelm rules alone, known as the Wilhelmine era, where Germany was run by Kaiser Wilhelm. In 1918, what happens? In exchange for peace, Kaiser Wilhelm had to surrender the throne and leave Germany. So this is the end of the Kaisers. Then they have a new government, a republic, which is 1919 to 1933. This is the third phase. This new government is known as the Weimar Republic. If we mark the last stages of Germany, what happened in 1933? Who is the fourth leader or the fourth stage run by? And that would be Hitler. 1933 to 1945 is the fourth stage, which is Hitler and the Nazi Party. When we come to our history in World War II, we can see the King of the North is in his fourth generation when we consider the life cycle of Germany leading up to World War II. Did everybody follow that? There's 4 generations that she's marking this as 4 generations for the King of the North. And what then happens in the 4th generation?
Judgment. Yeah.
Judgment. So there was a question, and we're still trying to understand how we can overlay our lines into 4. So you take the one big long line of Pyrus, divide it into 2. How do you then take it and put the alpha on top of the omega, as well as then stacking it on top of the alpha and the omega of our time? So with all the conclusions that we're going to come back to 2 things. Just knowing the history and understanding that we can apply it this way. We need to review that. We understand that in 1989, there was a deadly wound inflicted on the King of the South. The King of the South began to die, and he died in 1991. And who was that King of the South?
Oh, that was, wasn't it the USSR?
Yes. We get this story because it's Daniel 11:40, part B. We compared and contrasted with Daniel 11:40, part A, which is the history of 1798, the deadly wound of the papacy. Then we compared and contrasted it. We understood that the papacy, in a period future to its death, prophecy says it would resurrect. By compare and contrast, we know that the King of the South died in 1991, but he's going to resurrect. When we see it this way, we can understand that the King of the South is alive after 1991 at some point. So it's alive after 1991, but it dies at 1991. So if it dies here, it's also alive before 1991. So we understand that the King of the South is in 2 parts. It was alive because we know it had to be alive in order for it to die. But we also know that it resurrects. So it's alive before and alive after, comes in 2 parts. We can call one the Soviet Union and one Russia. When it resurrects, it has a different body. Just based on the structure, we can see that it has an alpha and an omega history. It will come in 2 parts. We have an alpha and an omega, and that's what we drew above. It's the Soviet Union that goes into war with Germany, and then it's Russia that goes to war with the United States. How do we know that its life in its alpha related to its war in Germany? In other words, how do we know where to place it? And we can see here, prior to 1989, it was alive, the King of the South was alive, and then it receives a deadly wound, and then it dies. But we know that it's alive again in our day. So there's 2 parts to it, just like there were 2 parts to the King of the North, 4 parts. We're looking at the 4th generation, but being resurrected.
Can we just have a reminder on the breaking of 2 parts? And my question is referring to, hold on, let me get my question straight. Oh, are you talking about 2 parts as far as the King of the war of who strikes who, or are you talking about as far as within that dispensation? If you get what I'm saying, because you're talking about a death and a resurrection as a part A,
but if we're
the part B.
Well, the difference in here is that part A is the King of the North. The part A is telling us that the King of the North will have the same features as the King of the South. So part A is telling us that the King of the North receives a deadly wound and then dies and then is resurrected. That's how we know the King of the South then
Oh.
is two
okay.
parts because
Okay, yeah,
he
yeah.
was alive.
Yeah,
He gets
okay.
a deadly wound,
Okay, I get it. Okay.
and so he's in two parts.
Okay, got it.
So when you look at, then you break down Pyrrhus in
Yeah.
his first part of his history, and then the second part of his history.
Ah, okay, got it.
Okay. So how do we know that it's related to Germany? If it's alive in that history, we're saying that is World War II and Stalin and Hitler, just like the Omega. World War III, it's Putin and Trump. How do we know that it's not another history? We might want to say it's a Cold War, or maybe it's the Kaiser or the Tsar in World War I. We could just say that it's just very similar history to Pyrrhus. But we did this before we looked at any of Pyrrhus's history. We did align and placed Pyrrhus because we already understood that Pyrrhus represented the king of the south. We recognized him as the 10th. Everybody remember that study? When we went through that Pyrrhus was the 10th. What was his father's name? Acides? Is that how you say that?
Acides.
And so Pyrrhus was the 10th because we already understood that Pyrrhus represented the king of the south. We recognized him as the 10th. We took him back to the first king. Then if Pyrrhus is the king of the south in our history, which we know because we placed him up to Sunday law, in the story of Pyrrhus, we can place him up to Sunday law, then he must represent Vladimir Putin. And if Pyrrhus is the 10th, and in the Alpha and the Omega, we want to see who is the first. If Putin is the 10th, who is the first? And we did that history before in another study as well, and showed that you count back from Putin and you go back to Stalin. We're not talking about the Tsar or any other history. It's the history of Stalin. And Stalin fought against one enemy, and that was Hitler. And that's the history of World War II. I do have his name here. Admetus. Is that what you said?
No, I
Admetus.
thought it was Acides, but there's a lot of them in there.
I know. So Admetus was the father, and Pyrrhus was the 10th. Putin is the king of the south now, and you go back, and Stalin was the first, Putin is the 10th. And that's how you line up to understand how we mark it at World War II with Stalin, as opposed to going back to the Tsar or anyone else. We saw that the king of the south came in two parts. We already understood that Pyrrhus typified the king of the south. We looked at many more kings of Epirus than just those two. That gave extra weight to seeing Stalin and Putin. So if it's Stalin and Putin, it gives us the history of World War II, Stalin and Hitler. From there, we can actually look into their histories. The Macedonian War, we mark the Fourth Diadochi War, and this is where Pyrrhus becomes involved in world affairs at about 15 years of age. We mark the end of Italy, 272 BC, of his work in Italy, not the end of Italy. 272 BC.
The end of Pyrrhus.
Yeah, the end of Pyrrhus.
Italy,
Yeah, in Italy. Where our king of the south dies at the end of our line in 272 BC. So we mark it from 307 to 272, and this is his whole life. Then when we bring this history and make application, we can see the whole life of the king of the south. We understand with Pyrrhus, in the middle of this history, he was defeated totally and completely. From Macedonia to Italy, there's a complete and total defeat before he goes to Italy. Then he had to resurrect in a totally different country. First, he's fighting in Macedonia, then he dies, so to speak, and when he resurrects, he's in a different battle against a different nation in a different country. So we can see Pyrrhus comes in two parts. Does everybody follow that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Hold on, where it says, so we can see Pyrrhus comes in two parts. We're talking about.
His first part is Macedonia,
Right, I get that.
and then he dies.
Right.
He doesn't die physically, but
His work dies.
his work dies.
Yeah, he's done with.
So the king of the south
Macedonia's
war, he dies, he dies. But then he gets brought into by Demetrius to come in and fight with Italy, and that's the second part of his life.
Okay, got it.
I don't think Demetrius is dead then he can't bring him in to fight. It's Tarentum that calls Pyrrhus over to fight.
Yeah, my bad.
It's okay.
Tarentum, not Demetrius.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
Thank
think that's
you.
what you meant.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
But remember,
Again,
how-
it's a lot of names.
yeah. So when Russia didn't get destroyed in 1989 or 1991, they still existed as a country, but their death was because they lost all their spheres of influence. They lost
The
everything.
USSR.
Right.
Yeah, the
Not Russia.
USSR lost everything except for Russia, the country, right? That's all they had. So that was their death.
Mhm.
And you had Lysimachus and Pyrrhus fighting in that last war where Demetrius was killed. They came together to kill Demetrius, one
Mhm,
from
yep.
this side, one from the other side. And when Lysimachus took that area, he wasn't happy with what he got. So through sanctions and subterfuge, he took every single sphere of influence Pyrrhus had until all he had left was Epirus.
Wow.
It's exactly like how Russia died. That's how Epirus died in that first one.
Mhm.
So it helps me to think of it that way,
Yeah.
to have them put in. So hopefully that helps.
I think some of that is in here coming up, not quite
Sorry.
all of it. No, that's totally okay because it was more, because I don't think it goes into Lysimachus the way you just described it, but it does tell how he winds up going back to and only has a Pyrrhus. Then we consider the king of the south in our history, and we see that he does the same thing. He comes to life prior to 1939, then he becomes involved in world politics, and then he fights Hitler in World War II. But when we get to the history of 1989 to 1991, we can see that he dies. He's defeated totally and completely. So the USSR receives this deadly wound and then dies. He's going to resurrect with a new body. He looks different. This is the Soviet Union, and then this is Russia.
Can I say something?
Uh-huh.
You know when it talks about the deadly wound, and we think of the papacy
Uh-huh.
and him having his deadly wound. Is it something that, how can I put it? The papacy wasn't working with Russia, with the USSR, was it?
It was working with
With
Hitler
Hitler.
against it.
Exactly. So I guess what I'm trying to ask is that, oh, okay. What am I trying to ask?
Well, on the previous page, it says that we compare Daniel 1140 part K with part B.
Right.
So-
Okay, so that's what I'm saying. Okay, sorry.
No, that's okay.
So if you see them both have a deadly wound and die, that's why.
Yeah.
So she's showing here that you have the USSR alive here. Basically what we said in the previous slide. He's alive here. He receives a deadly wound in 1989, and then he dies. So the Soviet Union is dead. But this is the history of the king of the South, not just the history of the USSR or Russia. It's who the king of the South is.
Right. I get that
Okay.
part.
And then the king of the South is resurrected and now is alive as Russia. All we have to do is bring our knowledge of how the beginning typifies the end, which we use all the time when we speak of Millerite history. If we wanted to do this, we could call this Acts 27 in the ship of Alexandria, and it could go from 1798 to the Sunday Law as one long line of Adventism. Does everybody remember the line of Alexandria?
Yeah.
Okay. We know that we had Adramyttium, but we're talking about Alexandria. Begins at 1798 and ends at the Sunday Law and is just one long history of Adventism. But we can see, but if we go into the history, we can divide it into two parts. We can call one the Millerite history and one the history of the 144,000, an alpha and an omega. Then we cut our line. We say that the Millerite history typifies our history. So here it's one long history of the Millerites and the 144,000, but it's in two parts. So if it's in two parts, we can cut our line, and this one typifies this one. So we take the 144,000 and bring it down underneath Miller history. Then we start lining up the histories, the waymarks. All that we're doing here is saying that World War II typifies World War III. So we can put World War II on top and World War III underneath. Now that gives us license or permission to, instead of treating it as one line, we can split it and overlay our line. This is what we do when we say Millerite history, the 144,000. We draw comparisons.
Amen.
Do you
And
follow
then
that?
yeah, I do. And then that's why we can draw from the 144,000 line the Levites, the Nethinims, and No, the priests, Levites, and Ethnims. But that's a different thing.
That's a
right?
different story, but that's how you can then take, well, then you start from that bigger model.
Right,
And then what happens in that bigger model happens in each one of us.
right,
But then what happens with each one of us in our big line is divided into 4 dispensations.
right.
And then each characteristic is in different ways, in different tests, but there's always your
Right.
increase of knowledge.
It's a model for the people. Oh my
Yeah,
man, it's
yeah,
a model for
exactly.
the people, and not. That's why the Levites and Ethnims are not a part of the 144,000. Hopefully I have this. The priests are, but their model or what's happening in each of those dispensations is happening. We can see happening in the lines of the priests, Ethnims, and Levites. That's why it's kind of a different structure, a different thing, right?
Yeah.
So every reform line is a line of birth to death.
Right.
So you have it for the king of the north, the false one, the true one, and the king of the south. So every reform line starts with the birth, the coming out of darkness, the coming out of death,
Increase
or
of
Laodicea. Yeah,
Mhm.
increase of knowledge.
Formalization.
Yeah, and then you have a death
Mhm.
where you mess up, you receive a wound, something, and you fall off, and that's where it ends. So we just keep finding those moments of history where a big thing gets born, it goes on, it has a progression, it ends. We stack it on top, and let's compare and contrast.
So our next structure, which is too big to put on this page, you're going to see it in a minute. The same as the structure of the 2 parts of Pyrrhus and the King of the South in 2 parts. We started with Macedonia over World War II, and we saw an alliance and then an alliance, and I'll show that as we go when we go to the next slide. I just couldn't fit it all together. We saw all the similarities between Macedonia and World War II. Then we did the Omega history of Italy. We haven't done our own Omega history. Below we have the 2 Alpha histories, Macedonia and World War II. So the first and the third line is what we're looking at. So hold these thoughts because we're going to go to the next slide in a minute here. What we've done is insert our Omega histories into this concept. Now we have Pyrrhus's life in 2 parts and the King of the South in 2 parts, the Alpha and Omega history. What we would have done, if it would have worked, is left these 2 lines of Macedonia Alpha and World War II Alpha, and then separately understood Italy and make application. We can understand our history just by understanding Italy most directly typified. That wasn't working, so we just overlaid the lines. So this model here is what we're going to look at, but we're going to look at it through a more expanded, with the details and the waymarks in between. So I put it on there so it's still there for reference. We have Macedonia, which a lot of this we've already covered. So we're not going to go through the details of it. But you will see that there's an alliance here in Macedonia. You're going to see that coming up in not Italy, but then in World War II. So there's the line of history. So here you've got this Macedonia is the full line here, and all the details that are entailed all fit inside this first part of Pyrrhus's life. Then you've got Italy, and these are the details that fall in this history of his battles in Italy. That's his Omega.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got Stalin, World War II, and this is all the history and all the details that we've been studying that go into the understanding of lining things up. So you see here in World War II, because you can line up Macedonia and World War II, you've got an alliance and an alliance.
Right, because you could only look at the Omega with them. You can only compare the Omega to the Omega. A line of success to a line of excess, and a line of failure to a line of failure.
Right. So Italy is the Omega, and then we haven't yet looked at ours. Everybody follow that?
And it's important, I think, to note that this is all coming from one perspective. And what's that perspective?
What do you mean? Expand a little bit.
What perspective is this all? Through what goggles? Through whose goggles are we looking at this line through?
The King of the North or the Pirates? Like, Pyrrhus, right?
The king of the south.
King of the South.
Because we were ignoring events to do with the king of the south, and that's what Sister Tess says. Acts 27 took her to Pyrrhus, which took her to Putin, which all shows you the story of the king of the south.
Yeah. Sometimes it's really hard to tell where a person's going when it's such a simple answer.
This is what they do to me all the time, so I'm just
So,
propagating the
Because
issues.
it is. It's the story of the King of the South. And how many times have we heard that emphasized
I
in
know,
some of these
yeah,
studies?
I
It's like,
know.
hello.
Yeah. I mean, I
It's the story
was
of the King of
thinking
the
that too as we're going through the study. That was in my mind, but then I was like, when you ask the question, I'm thinking you're probably trying to go somewhere else. Like, so I don't
That's
know.
what Parmenter does all the time, and I'm like, what do you?
Okay. So we'll do a quick review of Italy. We need to make sure that we understand it more clearly, and because Italy is the line of success.
Mhm.
This is where Rome enters world affairs and it becomes famous in the Pyrrhic War. The first thing we need to understand is that in Italy, there is a war over spheres of influence. This is what Sister Adriana was bringing up. Also, Elder Parmenter is taught about 1798 and 1840 in relation to Coal Syria. So the spheres of influence in that area of Coal Syria, which we looked at in several different ways. What we need to see is that this is the same story as 285 BC. There's a struggle going on in Italy over spheres of influence. If you were to choose whose influence you came under, what two options did you have? If you're in Italy, what two options did you have? In 285 BC, if you were Thurii, you're not very strong on your own, and you need to come under a stronger nation or power. You have two options. And what are they? If we look at Italy, Italy and Thurii, who's ruling the north in Italy? Who's ruling North Italy? Rome. And who rules the south? Greece? Tarentum?
The Greek city-states.
Yeah, Greek city-states, yeah. And Tarentum is the one that's ruling. What two options do you have, Rome or Tarentum? Or to keep it simple, we have a king of the north or a king of the south. So your Thurii, which I don't think it shows Thurii on this particular map.
Yeah,
if
it
I can
does.
get my mouse,
It doesn't say, but
There we
it
go.
has a little
Yeah.
it's right in here.
circle.
It
What
just
is-
didn't say it, but
what
this
is
is Thurii. I was just
oh.
trying to get my mouse active. It hides. So this is Thurii, and the south of Italy is ruled by the Greek city-states, headed mainly by Tarentum, if I understand that correctly.
Wait, can you point out Thurii again?
Yeah, if my mouse.
I
was
know
on
it's
this
right
thing.
above
That's
Heraclea.
around.
Right in here. See where the
Yeah.
arrow is?
Yeah, it's right above Heraclea.
This is where they fight.
Okay.
Okay, so this is Thurii, and this is Tarentum, and we know that Rome is up in the north. Northern Italy is run by Rome, southern Italy is run by Tarentum. So you have a king of the south and you have a king of the north. And so in 285, there's a problem, and Thurii is not strong. So what two options do you have, Rome or Tarentum, or to keep it simple, the king of the north or the king of the north or the king of the south? Thurii is torn or divided. Whose authority does Thurii normally come under?
Tarentum?
Under Tarentum, because they're all relatives. They're the Greek city-states. But in 285, they start to make a switch and they move from being under the protection of Tarentum to Rome. And that story was, we don't go into this. I think we went into that in the last study when it talks about the Democrats and the aristocrats. And that the aristocrats wanted to be able to have trade with Rome. Maybe there's probably more to that. So they had the choice between staying with their relatives, the Greek city-states in Tarentum, or by choosing Rome, and they chose Rome.
I remember.
But in 285, they start to make a switch and they move from being under the protection of Tarentum to Rome, and Tarentum resents that. Tarentum tries to take Thurii back by force in 282. This sparks a war between Rome and Tarentum. They are not strong enough to fight on their own. Tarentum is not strong enough to fight on their own, and they ask Pyrrhus to come and fight for them.
Okay, whoa. Just to kind of get an image here. So Tarentum wants Thurii back.
Correct.
And now that Thurii is under the rule of the king of the north, it makes it harder for Tarentum to get Thurii back because, is that why they're weaker? Is that why they're weaker? Because Thurii has a stronger I don't know. They're fighting they're fighting the king of the north to have Thury back, right? Or are they trying to what is their force against? Is it a force against king of the north to give them back Thury, or is it a persuasion for Thury to come back to them?
I think it
What
was,
makes them weak?
there was a peace treaty. Tarentum hates Rome.
Uh-huh.
And when Rome came into that gulf there to fight,
That was in last week's study too.
Thury, they broke that peace treaty.
Right. Okay.
And with that,
plus too that Thury was a Republican, so they wanted when they asked Rome, they knew Rome could bring them more prosperity, so they were more into money, whereas Tarentum was democratic, and they were more worried about their heritage and their being Greek, and so their whole thing was, they wanted to keep the culture alive,
Keep the family together.
right? Because they're all family. Pyrrhus' family, the people in Tarentum are family, and the people in Thury are family. So and then when Thury went outside of the family to Rome, that just sparked a big fight.
Yes, but the south part was made of multiple cities that per se they were not completely united.
Yeah.
That's why Tarentum was not strong enough to fight Thury and Rome.
Oh,
So
sounds
that's
like
why they
that's
needed
history.
somebody from outside that was stronger to help them do that.
So that is where they brought Pyrrhus in.
does it say why Thury asked Rome for help here?
Thury asked Rome for help.
Yeah.
Well, what she was just talking about, where they wanted to be able to have commerce and trade with Rome.
No.
Well,
if
Thury was
she
under
attacked by the
attack
Gauls.
by, I don't know who, but
the Gauls, it was by the Gauls.
Yeah, there was that back there.
They were all attacking all the little Greek city-states, and it was because Greece wasn't originally a part of that area, right? They colonized there from the main body of Greece, and they just put little Greek city-states there. It was colonialism, basically. And so the indigenous population of the Gauls, which they considered barbarians, were attacking the little cities, and none of them were strong enough to fight. So that is what, because they would have been sitting there deciding whether they liked Rome or not forever, but then it came to the point where they were being really attacked and they didn't have any help and they needed someone. So.
Okay, and the peace treaty, I know the peace treaty came from 40 years previously. It might be still in this particular presentation, I can't remember, but the peace treaty where they were not to sail into the Gulf of Tarentum, and they broke that peace treaty when they came down here to help Thury, and then that's where Tarentum sparks war with Rome, because Rome broke the peace treaty with the South. But the peace treaties broke because part of the South is seeking Rome to unite with Rome.
Right.
So it's a family squabble.
Yep. Wow. Is that why Tarentum is weak? Because of that family
Well,
squabble?
I think, I don't know for sure, but what Christina said, I think that's right, and maybe Adriana knows, because they were all these Greek city-states, but they weren't perfectly united. But Tarentum was the kind of the strong
that's what I'm
leader of them all, but they weren't all perfect,
Yeah,
perfect
because
unity.
when Pyrrhus came, what he did, he went to all this city, you do a lot of propaganda and you unite them. And then if you have united forces, you can fight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when they're not united, they're not strong to fight.
Right. That's
Well,
what I was getting at.
It's also relative because Rome was very, very strong. They were very, very formidable endpoint. That's why I don't even think if all the little Greek city-states got together that they might have been able to stop Rome, because Rome was getting so huge and they could so easily, like it said in the Pyrrhic victories, he lost a lot because Rome could just replenish its army.
Yeah. So it sparks war between Rome and Tarentum. They're not strong. Tarentum is not strong enough to fight on their own, and they ask Pyrrhus here from Epirus to come and help. And Pyrrhus comes to Tarentum, and that's here, 280 BC. He comes to Tarentum, and he fights against Rome in 3 battles: Heraclea, and this first one in Heraclea, Asculum, and then Beneventum. And we know those as 2018, 2019, and Panium. The first two battles he wins, Heraclea and Asculum. He wins at Heraclea, and Heraclea is a much smaller battle. He doesn't yet have full strength of his army. And from, I don't remember if it's in this study, but when he comes, his whole army is not all there yet. And how does he win the battle? With elephants. They go their separate ways over the winter. So they fight Heraclea, they go their separate ways over the winter, and they prepare for war. It's kind of interesting that Heraclea was 2018, right?
Mm-hmm.
Coming into winter.
Mm-hmm.
Brother Jonathan says, I think I have a little bit of information on why 30. Sorry.
Go ahead, John.
I was just looking on a wiki page. I didn't want to interrupt, but I found just a section of the page here where it says, oh, where did it start? I could read what happened before, but it's probably a lot. I'll just read from this point. It says, at this point, it is still an independent Greek city, referring to Thurii. Was Thurii also Greek, or is this Tarentum?
No, they both were.
They both were.
Okay, so this is talking about Thurii. Though much fallen from its former greatness, no mention of it is found during the wars of Alexander of Epirus in this part of Italy, but at a later period, it was so hard pressed by the Lucanians that it had recourse to the alliance of Rome, and a Roman army was sent to its relief under Gaius Fabricius Licinius. He defeated the Lucanians, who had actually laid siege to the city in a pitched battle, and by several other successes to a great extent broke their power and thus relieved the Thurians from all immediate danger from the quarter. But shortly after, they were attacked on the other side by the Tarentines, who were said to have taken and plundered their city, and this aggression was one of the immediate causes of the war declared by the Romans against Tarentum in 282 BC. So it seems like Thurii was being attacked by the Lucanians. Rome came to their assistance and then helped them out, so they were indebted. And then the Tarentines, who I'm guessing is Tarentum, they plundered Thurii, and then Rome went to war against Tarentum.
Yeah, because when Rome came, so when Rome went to Thurii, they put a garrison in Thurii, and they had a bunch of naval ships in the bay. Yeah, and that was the breaking of the peace treaty, and that's why the Tarentines skedaddled over.
The garrison.
Who are the Lucanians?
Must be another area. I'll look for a map that has that. But
So they go away for the winter, and then they prepare for war, and then they fight again at Asculum the next spring. Pyrrhus again wins because of his elephants. It's a larger battle, and it goes for 2 days. So we can mark a doubling here. Pyrrhus makes a decision to leave the war in Italy for a while. He makes an armistice with Rome, and he leaves for Sicily. He has this great plan that he will take Sicily, then Carthage, build up an incredible army and navy, and then sail back around and take Greece, Macedonia, and then back around and take Rome. So he wants it all, it sounds like.
Yeah, he wanted the whole empire of Alexander.
He has a very ambitious plan. He has a problem when he gets to Sicily. He starts to run out of money. He raised the temple of their goddess, and he loses all of the money. He raised the temple, but he hasn't benefited by it because all the ships carrying the treasure are shipwrecked. He also demonstrates that he's a dictator in how he takes over Sicily, because he puts them to work at building this navy for him. He put Sicily under such subjection that they regretted asking him to help and to come and free them from Carthage. And they sailed back to Carthage and asked the Carthaginians to free them from Pyrrhus. The people that they wanted to be free from, they preferred as masters instead of Pyrrhus. So initially they wanted to be freed from the Carthaginians. They have Pyrrhus come and help. Pyrrhus is a dictator to them, puts them to work to build his own army for his own purpose. And they decide they want Carthage back to be ruling over them. So Pyrrhus leaves. He's forced to leave because of the conditions in Sicily, but also because Rome is marching south. They have broken the armistice, but are marching on Tarentum. He sails back and fights Rome one last time at Beneventum, and he loses this battle. And we know that to be Panium. Why does he lose this battle? Elephants. So when you go back to the Pyrrhic War, I think I have that something in that at the end of at the end of the slides. But with the Pyrrhic Wars, why they call it the Pyrrhic Wars, because at the Battle of Asculum is where he made the comment that if he beat Rome one more time, I don't remember how it says. Maybe somebody remembers exactly how it said. I have it in here.
If we win against Rome one more time, we'll be finished.
We'll be finished. Yeah.
Something like that.
So he was not able to replenish his army. I think that was in last week's study, and Sister Adriana brought it up. So Rome could readily replenish their army. He would win these victories, but he lost a lot in doing so. So let's
Lost
see.
a lot of men.
Lost a lot of men, and he didn't have anybody to replenish from.
Dang.
So
Oh, you're at the
I wonder
elephants
how
because
that
I'm
matches
curious
with
about the
Putin.
elephants.
yeah,
I'm curious about well,
how he
a
loses the
thought
battle.
did come to my mind about that with Putin, but my mind is all over the place and grappling with all that's being in my head. But elephants who had where you are with elephants, because that's bringing up a question in my head.
Okay, so he wins the first two battles with elephants. He loses Beneventum because of the elephants. And who did the elephants belong to in this battle?
Pyrrhus.
They were Pyrrhus's elephants.
They turned against him.
Yeah, that's right.
It's Pyrrhus against Rome, and who has the elephants? Pyrrhus had the elephants, and elephants decided who won. So why did Pyrrhus lose? He had the elephants. Why did he lose? Rome won because of Pyrrhus's elephants. Why did Rome win? Pyrrhus is marching, and he has his elephants marching in front of him, and he's coming against Rome. Rome has no elephants. One of the baby elephants was injured and cried out. The mother of the baby elephant heard its cries and turns to find her baby. Then all the elephants turn and follow her. They end up charging Pyrrhus's army.
Sorry, I don't mean to laugh at
He
that.
doesn't know
But-
how to handle elephants.
Yeah,
Wow, it backfires. Well, with all of his knowledge about ink through KGB and all those things, I guess he comes to find out that he's like too short.
Well, when you play information warfare, you're both, you and your enemy, whoever you're playing against, you're both
Both
stuck
go.
in that position because you're both playing information warfare. You can both be discovered.
That's a slippery.
Slippery.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so Pyrrhus loses Beneventum because of his own elephants, his own method of warfare. And as you guys are discussing, what is Putin's method of warfare? Information war. So when Putin loses at Panium, Beneventum is Panium. When Putin loses, it's because of his own method of warfare.
Yeah.
Pyrrhus flees and goes back to Epirus. Between 275 and 272, Rome is slowly taking control of the south. So Rome is looking to take over all of it now. And this is a process that takes time. They've defeated Pyrrhus, but this is full of Greek city-states. There are treaties they have to go into, other battles and sieges they have to win. Even though in 275, the king of the south is mortally wounded, it's not dead, it still continues on. So at Panium, Putin receives a deadly wound, but he's not dead until, well, we'll get to that part.
So who's Tarentum?
Who's Tarentum? I don't know.
Who asked Putin for help to fight against King of the North? Is that a thing, or does that not go over?
It seems like the Greek city-states are the spheres of influence,
That's what I was thinking too.
because after Pyrrhus is defeated, after Putin is defeated, the United States will still have to go and gather up those spheres of influence that Russia had gathered. And I guess Tarentum would be one of those. It sounds like a key one. Could be Syria, possibly, or something. Was Henry suggest?
That kind of makes sense. When you think about the spheres of influence being under control of Putin, Putin, and he's a dictator or whatever, spheres of influence, and you have someone over you that's a dictator, you would want to go back to the others your original leader, that you fled from, to have him ruling over you. I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking, because we wondered how, why they would want to go back to Carthage or something like that, after saying they wanted to be under Rome. Sorry, I'm kind of mixed up. But
No, but it's good because when you put it back to Putin, and he does have the spheres of influence, it's somebody calling Putin to help.
Yeah, I'm thinking about Syria right now because ever since Trump took out all his forces, you just see on the news. And now Assad has gained victory over the rebels here, and he's gained victory over the rebels here, and the rebels are almost all stamped out, and the rebels were the United States. They were being backed by the US, but the US pulled out. Now Russia takes Syria completely. I don't know.
So
There's other potential as well with Iran, with what's going on down there. But another one that I was thinking was China with the trade war, because that's, Trump right now is calling American companies to come out of China, and to invest back in the United States, because of the trade war. And China is strong because of the relationship they have with the United States. But if that shatters and collapses, then China, which is allied with Russia to some degree, but because they're a strong power as well, they want to be independent, but they would have to become dependent on Russia, because if their dependence on the US is cut off, they have to be backed by someone else. So they're a bigger power than Syria, obviously, so it could very well be them.
Sister Christine and Brother Francisco, they asked, Venezuela asked Putin for help?
Yeah.
Venezuela is the reason why they're allied with Putin is because of their oil, because of the resources there. And Putin got them, I guess, before the United States could overthrow their government. The United States has been trying to overthrow their system for quite a while. Maduro is the current leader, but I think Hugo Chavez was the guy before. And the US had constantly interfered with their government style, trying to overthrow them. And so they were backed by Russia to try to keep them afloat. But
Venezuela is reminding me, though, kind of Sicily, because Sicily wanted, they didn't want Carthage as masters. No, because that's Carthage, that's not Rome. Oh, Carthage and Rome.
But Carthage was a part of Rome.
They
is a part of Rome.
No.
Not at that time, I don't think, were they?
No, the Punic Wars, it took a while before Rome was strong enough to completely destroy Carthage, but Carthage was a rival power for a long time against Rome. And the Carthaginians, they almost were what all of our lives were based off of instead of the Romans, but because of what all happened. It's also a very interesting history to look at. But yeah, never mind on that, Sicily.
Sister Debbie says, if China and the US are at outs and China gets backing by Russia, that may be what tips the victory for the King of the South.
Yeah, huh?
Say that again.
I have to say it again too, like in my head. If China and the US are at out and China gets backing by Russia, that may be what tips the victory to King of the South. You want me to read it one more time?
No, because it's information warfare, but it's also economic, right?
Right.
Somebody like expound on this one.
How are you going to destroy each other economically?
Sister Debbie, can you expound on your questions so we can? Sister Christina wants to kind of have a further understanding of your question or your statement.
Well, the King of the South wins, right?
Yes.
Until finally the King of the North wins the last battle.
Yeah,
so that's what I was just meaning, that China, and it mainly has been economic, the ties between China and the US. But if China, all this Huawei incident and the Canadian wheat and the tariffs that Trump is putting out, heightening and so on. So if China and the US are no longer aligned, as Brother Jonathan was saying, it only makes sense that China would seek out, backing by Russia, and that's it. In the information war, as well as the economic war, China tips over to the side with Russia and Iran and, etc. Is that maybe not going to be the very tipping of the scale that will give the King of the South victory? Information war, China's right in there as well with the information war. Battling in the Arctic, Russia, the US, Canada, China's interested. It's involved too, going after these resources because of the economic boon. So I was just wondering, sort of thinking aloud, would that be maybe the very thing that would help tip the balance of scales towards King of the South? And that's where Trump, whether it happens before the 2020 election or prior to it, where he's going to be coming back with full force in a sense, and the King of the South, the King of the North rather, wins the final battle.
And to keep it all in the right perspective, I know I needed this. I don't know if anybody else did, just a refresher, that because what we're really talking about is this history here, not Beneventum where he dies, but in here where he wins at the Battle of Raphia, Asculum Raphia.
Yeah, 2009.
So in 2019. So what we're talking about is the King of the South's victory at Raphia and what that might look like in our history.
And that's the, Sister Elaine, that was the point. In a sense, I was thinking, if China's been a bit of a wild card in that it has been connected to the US and lesser to Canada, this balance of trade. And so if the balance of trade shuts down between China and the US, would that be a help in tipping the victory even more so towards King of the South for Russia?
Yeah.
We're kind of tied to China because when we had that big stock market crash because we just squandered all the money that we had, China bought up all the debt in the U.S. and they invested in the dollar versus anybody else. So they're really financially tied to us, and nobody's really looking at that. But they own quite a bit of debt, of the U.S. debt, and they shored up our country. So it kind of surprised me when Trump went after them, and I could see when they stole, trade secrets and things like that. But at the same time, we got to look at it, that part of it too, the debt part. So if they wanted to, they can sell off their debt and sell it to another country, which would put pressure on us because they could call in the debt. Yeah, they could sell it to Russia if they wanted to. If they wanted really to mess us up, they could do that.
But that'd be interesting because you think of Germany in World War II not paying their debts to Russia. The United States wouldn't pay their debt to Russia either. I don't think that Russia would want to buy it up because they know that they wouldn't. There's no way for them to get it. No, China can't really get it either. The benefit to China to have bought up the certificates or whatever is that they had economic commerce with the United States, which was giving them a big boom. All these companies were going over there.
Well, they're tied in with the infrastructure too, because they bought a lot of property and businesses. A lot of businesses are Chinese owned and have investors put money into the country.
Till then, you're raising your hand.
Yeah, so we're tied together one way or another.
Sister Adriana wants to comment on something.
She was
and
raising
then-
your hand, but you couldn't see her.
And then Sister Ali, I'll mention your question out loud to you. Okay, go ahead, Sister Adriana.
So I don't know if this is right, but Raphia happens and the king of the south wins, right?
Mhm.
And then he becomes weakened, and then Antiochus comes back with much riches and forces that he won in his eastern expedition. So I'm wondering if that battle with Russia situation is happening, or with China, and then while this situation with Russia is happening, Trump is gaining forces with his war with China, and then when it's time for Panium to come about, he finally gains the victory over China and gets all the riches from there, and he's able to subdue Russia.
Oh wow.
Because it says here, this is from Daniel and Revelation on verse.
To say I don't see China uniting with Russia.
Yeah, because it also seems like
Yeah,
another.
United States is trying to destabilize them from inside.
Right, because the China is another free agent, not a king of the north either side. But so what it says here, it's one paragraph, this explanation of verse 13, and this is after Raphia. Verse 12, 11 and 12 are the Battle of Raphia, and now you have the events predicted in this verse were to occur after certain years. The peace concluded between Ptolemy Philopator and Antiochus lasted 14 years. Meanwhile, this is the king of the south, Ptolemy died from intemperance and debauchery, and was succeeded by his son Ptolemy Epiphanes, a child then 4 or 5 years old. Antiochus, during the same time, having suppressed rebellion in his kingdom, which we have rebellion in Trump's kingdom here, and reduced and settled the eastern parts in their obedience, was at leisure for any enterprise when young Epiphanes came to the throne of Egypt. And thinking this too good an opportunity for enlarging his dominion to be let slip, he raised an immense army greater than the former, for he had collected many forces and acquired great riches in his eastern expedition. And he set out against Egypt. So that's why, I don't know, this is just what I'm thinking, because everything I ever thought about this, she starts placing it on top of everything Daniel and Revelation was with the wars with Pyrrhus and everything.
And I'm gonna say something really quick, Sister Alice, before I mention your question, and that, I believe Trump is the person to do that job. I mean, I'm not saying I'm for Trump or anything like that.
He's the chosen
But
one.
exactly, I really agree. I really believe that, and that God is just like Pharaoh, just like God chose Pharaoh to rule
For
at
such
that
a
time
time
for
as
such
that.
a time. Amen. That is the same thing for Trump, because I don't think anybody. I'm not saying that God couldn't use anybody else. I'm just saying that I don't think anybody would fit the position that God wants to carry out, that Trump is doing, that is effective to carry out the very work he wants done. Because with Trump, with all his tweets and the way his rhetoric, the way he is, I don't think anybody would work as Trump would work in getting this stuff done, and doing what he's doing. So
it's a repeat. The moral majority got Reagan elected, and Reagan knew that it was divine providence that he was there. In his fight against Russia, using the papacy to help him, he knew divine providence put him there, and he knew it's because also the Christian right helped him. Trump has the Christian right, and he knows he's the chosen one for this job. He has actually exactly correct. And so was Reagan, and everything is where it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I don't remember where I was reading from this morning, but one of the articles somebody had posted, there's a whole lot more going on to have him convinced that he's the chosen one than probably what we know. I was surprised at what I don't recall if maybe somebody remembers the article. I think it was on Facebook today. But there's a whole lot more reasons to why he really believes that he is that chosen one. And it comes from all the stuff that people are saying to him that we aren't really even necessarily always hearing. What the Christian right is saying to him, what these leaders are saying, that they love him.
Yeah, and there's two sides to that, because when Trump made that statement, a lot of it went like hashtag Antichrist. A lot of feed went to like, whoa, he's like kind of seeming like the Antichrist with the kind of things he's saying. But I don't know. There's kind of like two perspectives and two thoughts on his comment on that. But as far as him being fit for what he's doing. I believe the Lord had his hand in setting him up, because we know that God puts in place kings and rulers. So I agree. But Sister Ali is saying, will Islam still cause the economic crisis at midnight, or has there been other light about this economic crash soon? Yeah, that's her question.
Parminder's been saying that it's not happening at Raffia, but it's happening soon after. No, because he said next year, Mom.
Next year.
Yeah, because weren't you saying that date, July 21st,
2020.
He's not saying it's wrong. He's just saying that it's not our test right now, but there's light coming up on Islam and what's going to happen soon with them. So
I have another question.
Try again.
My mic? Okay, my sound of my mic is on. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Thank you so much for answering that last question. I was in a conversation on this side of the room and listening to you at the same time. So July 21, 2020, Islam is still in the picture, but we'll have more light on that at that time or around that time.
yes, from what Parminder sounds like he was saying.
Trying to reiterate what you just said.
We're learning about the King of the South, the stuff that we needed to know about the King of the South. Remember that when the south wind blows, then comes the east wind.
Exactly. Okay. And we're understanding our line right now, and Islam is really not part of the equation at all at this moment, because we're really trying to understand everything prior to November 9.
Right.
It's I don't know if this is right to still say. Do you remember when Rome is up, then Islam is up, and Rome is down, then Islam is kind of down, like oppressed?
It's vice versa.
Oh, it's vice versa. Okay.
When Rome is up, Islam is down. When Islam is up, Rome is down, because they're counterweights. They oppose each other.
But we're not seeing anything by either one of them at all today, though, right? Because
on the Protestants, they're in power, so Islam is subdued. But
okay,
Raffia, the South wins, so the North is down. Now Islam can come in. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I just I'm just trying to weigh this out, because I just remembering the old stuff at the same time, and that we still have to see that. But unless the new light, you know, I'm picking up slowly but surely. I'm getting there. Okay.
Just one thing. Sister Debbie says Trump doubled down on his comments, indicating I was only joking. His base believes he's been chosen for this time. However, it has been revealed that he has a copy of the speeches of Hitler that he keeps on his nightstand. Melania or Ivanka revealed this.
Yeah, that's true. I remember Milena had an interview around Trump's election a few years ago, 2016, and she said that he used to read Hitler's Mein Kampf, if I'm saying that correct, and it used to give her the chills that he would read this book, and he always had it by his bedstand. So he's gleaning from it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So Tarentum, go ahead. So Tarentum itself held out against Rome for 3 years until 272 BC. If we consider Tarentum as a symbol of the King of the South, its death is inevitable. There was no way they can hold out against Rome. The defeat was gradual until 272. We also looked at Pyrrhus in this history. He went back to Epirus. There are a couple of other details we need to look at regarding how he died. We looked at the city of Argos, which gave us the meaning of harvest time, the appearance of rain when it's ready to harvest. What Pyrrhus does when he gets back to his country is immediately go into another war. He finds himself fighting in the city of Argos. We need to look at who he was fighting in this history after he leaves in 275. We need to see who kills Pyrrhus. We know it was a soldier, but who was that soldier fighting on behalf of? The soldier belonged to the army of Antigonus Gonatas. Antigonus was the father of Demetrius, and Demetrius had a son, and he named his son after his father. So Antigonus Gonatas is the son of Demetrius. The son who killed Pyrrhus was the son of Demetrius. Even though Pyrrhus dies in this history, he's not killed by just another random power. We can still see the link from Antigonus to Demetrius because he was Demetrius' son.
Can I ask a question here? So Pyrrhus and Demetrius were, let me get this straight, they were in alliance at one point, or no?
In the Battle of Ipsus and the one right before, yeah,
Right,
the third and fourth
okay.
Diadochi War, yeah.
Okay, so I am there,
Yeah.
okay. And so it says, even though, hold on, the son of Pyrrhus was the son of Demetrius. The son who killed Pyrrhus was the son of Demetrius. So even though Pyrrhus dies in the history, he's not killed just by another random power. We can still see the link from Antigonus to Demetrius. He is Demetrius' son. There's something
How
kind
did
of.
he get in Italy?
It's not in Italy. It was in Argos, which is in Greece, where Pyrrhus died, and he was fighting in the streets of Argos. That was, I'm pretty sure Argos is in Greece, and there was some other faction fighting there, and the descendant of Demetrius was running around causing that battle, and that's
But
where
didn't he
Pyrrhus.
die at
And so
No, Pyrrhus doesn't die at Beneventum. He loses the Battle of Beneventum, but he doesn't die there.
Okay.
So is that why? So basically, what am I trying to say? So I lost my thought, right? But
You're wondering why they were in alliance with Demetrius at
no.
first?
Demetrius' son is against Pyrrhus. Is
Yes.
okay, so Demetrius' son
There's
does.
a history there.
Right.
because-
Okay.
Demetrius was killed by Pyrrhus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the son revenges against Pyrrhus. That's
Yeah.
all interesting. That's kind of okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to reiterate, we're looking at here at Beneventum when he receives a deadly wound, right? But then he dies. And this is where he loses the battle. And it's because of these battles that brings Rome into the notice of the world and world affairs. And that's important to know here when you're looking at Daniel 11, in those verses in Daniel 11, when Rome comes on the scene. Antigonus Gonatas related to the most powerful of the Diadochi, the Antigonid Empire. His father was Demetrius, his grandfather Antigonus the One-Eye from the Battle of Ipsus. When it comes to the city of Argos, Antigonus and Pyrrhus had a quarrel. Pyrrhus tries to take the city because he hears that Antigonus is marching against him. Pyrrhus makes some poor decisions and leads his army to Argos. This is a large army fighting in the alleyways of this ancient town. When they realized it was a bad idea, they couldn't even leave because they had brought elephants with them. It wasn't a place to fight a battle. When they're fighting in the streets, he's fighting against the army of Antigonus and one of those soldiers that killed him. It was one of those soldiers that killed him. It said that Antigonus gave him a good burial and sends his surviving son to Epirus with the remains of Pyrrhus.
Wow. Interesting.
He treated him in a respectful way. When Tarentum heard of Pyrrhus's death, they surrendered to Rome. Even if Pyrrhus's death, we can tie him back to the previous king of the north in Pyrrhus's death. Demetrius, by this time, had died and gone into captivity shortly after Pyrrhus defeated him. He spent his last years under house arrest, and his son continues the work. Beneventum is marked as a deadly wound, but we're not marking 1945 as the wound. The history of Pyrrhus is a little more complex. It's one of the reasons we need to identify 1989 to 1991 as a period of time. So when we make our application, when we get to this history, we'll break those down a bit. That is the history of Pyrrhus in Italy. And we got to this history by going to 273 and understanding it because of the Pyrrhic War. Egypt visited Rome and opened up a diplomatic relationship. Then we applied 272, the death of Pyrrhus, the fall of Tarentum, and also Rome returns to Egypt. So again, that's the period here where Rome now is becoming famous. Egypt wants to get involved and know Rome. They send ambassadors to Rome. Epirus dies. Rome then sends ambassadors to Egypt. Tarentum falls and Pyrrhus dies. And there's the pirate victory again. And that's it for that one.
Is that before Cleopatra gets in the history or after?
Way before.
Yeah, I figured that. So because when you start seeing that, yeah, that connection.
So, oh, that does say E, okay. So if everybody's okay, so we stay on schedule, we don't take a break now, we just kind of do some of this equality talk until about 1:30 when we break, normal break for lunch.
Sure.
That works out okay?
Mhm.
Okay. You can see it, but it's not on your screen. Did I not? I need to unshare and go back and share this one. Okay. So now you can see the right one, right?
Yeah.
Equality is a big thing, and I want to recommend another, not like we don't have a lot to watch, there's plenty out there, that's for sure. But in France, number 27, on the issue of no buying and no selling. So Revelation 13, he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. So what does it mean to cause? We were talking about that a little bit on the break. What does it mean to cause?
Force.
Make happen.
To cause is you do something, an event that is a catalyst to cause different other things to
In
happen.
effect.
Yeah.
Well, I was
Cause and
thinking that,
effect, yeah.
But yeah, I was thinking that, but I'm just saying that.
Oh, okay. So it's not like I'm forcing you to keep the Sunday law. It's like I did something and now you have no choice but to, because that's the situation we ended up in.
I think that you still have a choice, but your temporal prosperity might be put on the table.
So I'm not sure how far we'll get through this, but these are pioneer A.T. Jones. And this is briefly comprehended and nobly expressed in the following words of the Declaration of Independence. This is the rights of the people. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That when any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Wow, that's really interesting.
But to
Really
get to that,
interesting.
That's the basis of the revolution.
yeah, because
That's interesting, yeah.
if the government turns bad, then that means all the people have to fight the whole army of the government.
But what
and
if the
destroy
whole
it.
people don't realize the government has turned bad? You got.
But that's the thing, is that the labor unions, they are going to fight against it.
Yeah.
That's why it ends up being such a mess in the cities, is that the labor unions are sick of the situation and not getting paid, and then they fight against the government. So there's going to be a battle. There's sure going to be a battle.
So thus in these two sentences was annihilated the despotic doctrine, which springing from the usurped authority of the papacy to sit in the place of God, or the chosen one, and to set up and pull down kings and to bestow kingdoms and empires at its arbitrary will, had become venerable, if not absolutely hallowed, by the precedents of 1,000 years, the doctrine of the divine right of rulers, and in the place of the old, false, and despotic theory of the sovereignty of the government and the subjection of the people, there was declared to all nations and for all time the self-evident truth, the subjection of the government and the sovereignty of the people. This self-evident and unalterable truth of the supremacy of the rights of the people in government was set forth as the fundamental principle of the government of the United States when the National Constitution was formed. For the preamble to that doctrine announces that. Document announces that.
If you see that there's a little hierarchy and there's a subjugation happening here of the government to the people. And that's not what we have today.
We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States. So we all, I think, know unalienable rights that cannot be legally or justly alienated or transferred to another. The dominions of a king are inalienable. All men have certain natural rights which are inalienable. The estate of a minor is inalienable without the reservation of the right of redemption or the authority of the legislature. So that these rights are rights that no one can give us and no one can take away. They're given to us by God.
You're born with them.
We're born with them. And this truth became an established and everlasting fixture of this government when the 9th and 10th Amendments were adopted. For Article 9 of the amendment says, the enumeration of the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. The powers not delegated to the United States by this Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. And that's a key thing there too, when it comes to between who supersedes the other, where you have the federal and the states. It is, however, the rights of the people with respect to religion with which we have here particularly to deal, as religion is the subject of the Supreme Court decision and the acts of Congress that are to be noticed.
So the states are above the federal government, isn't it?
You know, from what I was reading, looking up in this morning, that in the event of a conflict, the states can have their own laws and their own constitution.
Yeah.
But in the event of we were talking about it earlier, of a conflict, then the federal is over the state.
Yeah. Right. But that's only in the event of a conflict, I thought.
Yeah. That's if I read it correctly. It is, however, the rights of the people with respect to religion. Okay, let's see. The right of the people of the United States to be religious or not religious, each one for himself alone, without any notice or interference of the government in any way, is a natural, a constitutional, and a divine right. This natural right was one which was particularly considered in the times of 1776, and the establishment of the American independence, June 12, 1776, 22 days before the Declaration of Independence. A convention of the Colonial House of Burgesses of Virginia adopted a Declaration of Rights composed of 16 sections, every one of which in substance afterward found a place in the Declaration and the Constitution. The 16th section, in part, reads thus: that religion or the duty which we owe to our Creator and the manner of discharging it can be directed only by reason of conviction, not by force or violence, and therefore all men are equally entitled to the free exercise of religion, according to the dictates of conscience. July 4th following, the Declaration of Independence was made, wherein this principle is embodied in the statement that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. Governments deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed can never, of right exercise, any power not delegated by the governed. Now religion, pertaining solely to man's relationship to God, to the duty which man owes to his Creator, and the manner of discharging it, in the nature of things, can never be delegated to another. It is utterly impossible for any person ever, in any degree, to transfer to another any of his relationship to God. Makes me think of the parable of the virgins too. You cannot give your experience away either. or any duty which he owes to his creator, or the manner of discharging that duty. Man's relationship to God originates not with himself, but with the Lord. It springs not from himself, but from the Lord. The duty which man owes to his creator and the manner of discharging it spring not from himself, but from the Lord.
Amen, because God says we love him because he first loved us.
Yep. These are not dictated nor defined by himself, but wholly by the Lord. Here, man is subject, not sovereign. None of these things then springing from himself, but all from the Lord. None of them could he delegate if he would. Even to attempt it would be only to deny God and renounce religion. And even then, the thing would not be done. His relationship to God, the duty which he owes to his creator, and the manner of discharging it would remain as firmly fixed as binding upon himself as ever. Under the Declaration of Independence, therefore, the government of the United States can never have anything to do with religion. So there's a question, in 1989, do we know when the Sunday law is?
No.
No.
Could we know? Should we have known? Could we know?
We should.
Yes.
So I'm not sure if I have all of these ones correct. There were a couple of things that I've seen on some of the other, I remember the history that goes with each one of these dates, but some of them we are very familiar with. But we have 1989, you can trace that back here to 1863, the 126 years. And these are just other periods of 126. I put 1979 there because there's this 10-year period here that we are familiar with, and that this is when the period of time when the moral majority comes in, and I just traced it back. And I seem to remember there being something lines up with 1853. I just couldn't remember the event. So then you have 1888, and you go 126, and you come to 2014. You have 1893, and we know that this 1863 ends the chiastic structure where Jesus would have come, but he didn't. We went back into the wilderness, which is what I see you have on your board over there. Went back into the wilderness in 1863, and the 126 is the 10th of the 1260. We also know the 70 years of captivity represents the wilderness. So we're in the wilderness from 1863 to 1989. But there's a 10-year period here that is supposed to be awakening people to be prepared for what was going to happen and to know, to be able to understand prophecy. We missed it all. Okay, so then we come to 1888 and you come to 2014. And so once the 126 was understood, these dates began to line up because in 1888, there was an issue over the Sunday law. And that came up on the discussion of the Facebook post last Sabbath. How do you place a Sunday law, or how do we come to understand that a Sunday law is not a Sunday law? And 1888 came into the picture because General Adventism will say that we're repeating the history of 1888, and it was over a Sunday law. But if you come back to 1863, where she says, and when you trace her writings, you see that she doesn't discuss a Sunday law prior to in this history. She discusses the Sunday law in this history. So here, when she's saying Jesus could have come, would have come, there was no Sunday law in the picture, okay? And that's how we can take and say that here, the Sunday law is not what we think it's going to be. It's a union of church and state, which is what her statements actually say. So 1888 brings you to 2014. Elder Parmenter understood this in 2012. So he understood the end of the 126 would be that there would be an issue of Sunday law here. And in our study in the afternoon, we'll kind of, in the next study after this one, we'll go through looking at some of these things a little bit more about 2014 and the Sunday law. So just to point out, in 1989, could we have known? If we understood the prophecies as we were supposed to, we would have known. So possessions to decrease rather than increase. It is now that our brethren should be cutting down their possessions instead of increasing them. we are about to move to a better country and even a heavenly. Then let us not be dwellers upon the earth, but be getting things into as compact a compass as possible. The time is coming. I think kind of what I was saying last night, learn to live as simply as you can, but also in understanding that this battle is coming. We can do things on our part to make our Sabbath keeping less of a burden on people, able to to go out and teach the equality that we need to teach, and the liberty that we need to teach. And so that when some of these things happen, we are less inclined, and we'll kind of see that as we go along. The time is coming when we cannot sell at any price. The decree will soon go forth, prohibiting men to buy or sell of any man save he that hath the mark of the beast. So she's using the word decree in this particular passage. So keep that in mind, because there's lots to consider here when she uses the word decree. In the last great conflict, the controversy with Satan, those who are loyal to God will see every earthly support cut off. Because they refuse to break his law in obedience to earthly powers, they will be forbidden to buy or sell. It will finally be decreed that they shall be put to death. But to the obedient is given the promise, he shall dwell on high. His place of defense shall be the munitions of rocks. Bread shall be given him, and his waters be sure. By this promise, the children of God will live. When the earth shall be wasted with famine, they shall be fed. They shall not be ashamed in the evil time, and in the days of famine they shall be satisfied. To that time of distress, the prophet Habakkuk looked forward, and his words expressed the faith of the church. Although the fig tree shall not blossom, neither shall fruit be in the vines, the labor of the olive shall fail, and the fields shall yield no meat. The flock shall be cut off from the fold, and there shall be no herd in the stalls. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation.
Debbie wants to suggest that, Sister Debbie wants to suggest that with 1979 to 1989, that we did not simply miss it. What was happening generally, we would have waited on the wrong side perhaps. Home educators saw some of the tendencies of the religious right and the Sunday-keeping home educators opposite of inclusive. But as SDAs generally, we were not aware of the implications of any of these events surrounding the moral majority, election of Reagan, racism, sexism, etc.
Yeah, but we should have been.
Yeah,
We should have been.
We should have been. We should have seen when the moral majority was promoting a political party that's forming a union of church and state.
Right. And Sister Elaine, what I was meaning is we should have seen it.
Yeah.
There were signs all around. And the home education movement really was one of the ones possibly in the best situation at that time to pick up on some of these things, because already some of the unsavory aspects of the Sunday keeping thrust was made aware to home educators back in that time that were trying to open everything up and make it was a right, but I mean, make it an established, accepted thing for all peoples, whoever wanted to choose to home educate. And it was the Sunday keeping home educators and moral majority believers and Homeschool Legal Defense Association and just others that were really pushing this agenda. And it was a political agenda. Many of them had two thrusts. One was to out-Catholic the Catholics in the number of children you have a lot of children. These are Sunday-keeping, religious right, Protestant families. They started, a lot of them, they started having huge families, 11, 12 children. And this, because their intention was to outpopulate everybody else. And the second thrust was be political. And so every issue, whether it was abortion, whatever it is, they'd get a flurry, and this was back in the day before computers, they'd get a flurry of petition signing people. It would spread right through the US, and they tried to involve Canada as well, mainly Canadian home educators. And they were pushing a political agenda. And Michael Ferris of Homeschool Legal Defense Association and many others ran for office, and they made no bones about having a political agenda. And that was back in the early 80s and on through into the 90s, and that's it. It could have been picked up on by all of us on a variety of contexts, in a sense. Certainly some in this movement, in the early days, signs would have been there, but we would have probably weighed in part on the wrong side on some of the issues, maybe not all of them, but on some of the issues, much until our day now, with the new light that's come out.
Yeah, and if we had better understood the union of church and state, it would have been easier to see, but we had a wrong understanding of all these things. So when the leading churches of the United States, that's the Protestants, right, uniting upon such points of doctrine as are held by them in common, so the Protestants are united on their common doctrines, shall influence the state to enforce their decrees and to sustain their institutions, then Protestant America will have formed an image to the Roman hierarchy, and the infliction of civil penalties upon dissenters will inevitably result. So they began this process way back when. They were uniting with state, shall influence the state. Isn't that influence in the state, the moral majority? Aren't they influencing the state back in that history? To sustain their institutions. The beast with two horns causeth, commands all both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, that no man might buy or sell, save he that have the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. The third angel's warning is, if any man worship the beast in his image and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God. The beast mentioned in this message, whose worship is enforced by the two-horned beast, is the first, or leopard-like beast of Revelation 13, the papacy. The image to the beast represents that form of apostate Protestantism which will be developed when Protestant churches shall seek the aid of the civil power for the enforcement of their dogmas. The mark of the beast still remains to be defined. So the image represents that form of apostate. So the Protestants developed, right?
Quick question.
Shall seek the aid of civil power. Did they not do that back then?
She says that the mark of the beast still remains to be defined.
Yeah.
And isn't the mark of the beast the Sunday law? So the Sunday law still remains to be defined. Because isn't that what we were saying, what the mark of the beast was? Great Controversy, the 88 Controversy, Great 445.2.
Our land is in jeopardy. The time is drawing on when its legislators so abjure the principles of Protestantism as to give countenance to Romish apostasy. The people for whom God has so marvelously wrought, strengthening them to throw off the galling yoke of popery, will by a national act give vigor to the corrupt faith of Rome, and thus arouse the tyranny which only waits for a touch to start again into cruelty and despotism. So this was a process that brings us to when they did the work that they did from 79 to 89. They got involved in politics and are getting that union of church and state, and it leads to cruelty and despotism. What's despotism? I think I have it coming up. With rapid steps, we are already approaching this period when Protestant churches shall seek the support of the secular power, thus following the example of the apostate church, because that apostate church sought the secular power, for opposing which their ancestors endured the fiercest persecution, then there will be national apostasy, which will be followed by national ruin, end of national ruin. So what does no buy or sell look like, and when does it happen?
Going back to 79, 80, I remember watching the 700 Club. Pat Robinson was pushing a lot of this stuff.
Oh yeah, the church became involved in politics.
Right. He said, get involved, because wait till you're legislator. Get out and vote, and everything you're talking about.
And we're sitting here, Adventism is sitting here waiting for it to happen.
Yeah.
And it happened a long time ago, and we didn't even know it. Okay,
Well,
so
we missed our visitation.
yeah, yeah. And even in this movement, we missed our visitation.
Yeah.
Which is pointed out in one of the videos I was watching yesterday. Absolute power, authority, unlimited and uncontrolled by men, constitution or laws. Despotism, catch that it's absolute power, authority unlimited and controlled by men, constitution or laws, depending alone on the will of the prince, as the despotism of the Turkish sultan. So he has power over the constitutions and laws as well. He's going to supersede all of them. Absolute power, him. Tyranny, arbitrary or despotic exercises of power. The exercise of power over subjects and others with a rigor not authorized by law or justice, or not requisite for the purposes of government. Hence, tyranny is often synonymous with cruelty and oppression. It's cruel government or discipline as the tyranny of a master. Bondage, slavery or involuntary servitude, captivity, imprisonment, restraint of a person's liberty by compulsion. You can force a person without a law. You use persecution to force them. You don't have to have a law, because if you got despotism or a dictatorship or absolute power, it doesn't take a law. Just bring about a cause and in comes an effect. Slavery, bondage, the state of entire subjection of one person to the will of another. Slavery is the obligation to the laborer for the benefit of the master, without the contract of consent of the servant. Slavery may proceed from crimes, from captivity, or from debt. Slavery is also voluntary or involuntary. Voluntary, when a person sells or yields his own person to the absolute command of another. Involuntary, when he is placed under the absolute power of another without his own consent. Slavery no longer exists in Great Britain, not in the northern states of America. Office of slave drudgery. The 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution was adopted on July 9, 1868, as one of the Reconstruction Amendments. Arguably one of the most consequential amendments to this day, the amendment addresses citizenship rights and equal protection of the laws, and was proposed in response to issues related to former slaves following the American Civil War. The amendment was bitterly contested, particularly by the states of the defeated Confederacy, which were forced to ratify it in order to regain representation in Congress. The amendment, particularly its first section, is one of the most litigated parts of the Constitution, forming the basis for landmark decisions such as Brown versus Board Education, which we are going to look at, regarding racial segregation. We all know Roe v. Wade regarding abortion, Bush versus Gore regarding the 2000 election, and Obergefell and Hodges regarding the same-sex marriage. The amendment limits the actions of all state and local officials, including those acting on behalf of such an official. So the amendment limits the actions of the state and local officials. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. All men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The amendment's first section includes several clauses the Citizenship Clause, Privileges or Immunities Clause, Due Process Clause, Equal Protection Clause. The Citizenship Clause provides a broad definition of citizenship, nullifying the Supreme Court's decision in Dred Scott versus Sanford. I don't remember that one, but I know I've looked that one up in the past, which had held that Americans descended from African slaves could not be citizens of the United States. Since the slaughterhouse cases in 1873, the Privileges or Immunities Clause has been interpreted to do very little. The Due Process Clause prohibits state and local governments from depriving persons of liberty, life, liberty, or property without a fair procedure. The Supreme Court has ruled this clause makes most of the Bill of Rights as applicable to the states as it is to the federal government, as well as to recognize substantive and procedural requirements that state laws must satisfy. The Equal Protection Clause requires each state to provide equal protection under the law to all people, including all non-citizens within its jurisdiction. This clause has been the basis for many decisions rejecting irrational or unnecessary discrimination against people belonging to various groups. The second, third, and fourth sections of the amendment are seldom litigated. However, the second section's reference to rebellion or other crime has been invoked as a constitutional ground for felony disenfranchisement. I'm going to skip to that next part because we're mainly focusing on the first portion. And this is the list, and I'm going to skip through this too, just to save time. It just tells you what they are, so you can actually read them, and they're in the slide. You can read it. But the main portion of it is the first. So now we're going to go into looking at some of the areas where this has been litigated over. In the majority of U.S. states, people can be denied service in a restaurant, kicked out of a taxi cab, or denied access to a bathroom just because of who they are or whom they love. That's the alarming conclusion of a new report from the Movement Advancement Project. The report and an accompanying television ad highlight how public accommodations laws provide an unequal patchwork of protections for the LGBT people across the country. The result is that half of the LGBT people face a very real risk of discrimination and harassment in public places. The report outlines clear steps that lawmakers, advocates, and business owners can take to help ensure that when businesses serve the public, they serve everybody equally. Prominent chefs oppose baker in major gay rights case. Everybody's familiar, I think, with that, and we're going to read a little bit about it in the next couple of slides. Prominent chefs, bakers, and restaurant owners want the Supreme Court to rule against a Colorado baker who wouldn't make a cake for a same-sex couple's wedding.
Oh, I remember that story.
The food makers say that once they open their doors for business, they don't get to choose their customers. They say that abiding by laws that bar discrimination based on sexual orientation does not strip them of creative control of a dish or a pastry. Celebrity chefs, and then it goes on to say who they are.
What about the signs? When you go in there, they say, we have a right to reject or serve who we want.
And they actually kind of do.
They do. Well, they do. We're going to see that they do.
They do.
Well, because there's one sign right there that.
But that's what they used to do with blacks, though.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to see.
And they're not realizing they have that same spirit.
Yeah.
So the Supreme Court sides with the baker who refused to make gay wedding cake. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and on Monday it ruled 7-2 that the commission violated Phillips' rights Phillips is the baker, under the First Amendment, which guarantees freedom of expression. The court did not address the wider principle of whether a business can refuse to serve gay people, saying this must await further elaboration. Writing for the majority, Justice Anthony Kennedy and the CCRC showed hostility to Phillips' religious beliefs in ordering him to undergo anti-discrimination training. The laws in the Constitution can, and in some instances, must protect gay persons and gay couples in the exercise of their civil rights. Kennedy wrote, but religious and philosophical objections to gay marriage are protected views and in some instances protected forms of expression. The decision focused narrowly on the handling of Phillips' case, however, leaving open the question of whether anti-discrimination laws should supersede religious beliefs in future cases. The court's precedents make clear that the baker, in his capacity as the owner of a business serving the public, might have his right to the free exercise of religion, limited by generally applicable laws. Still, the delicate question of when the free exercise of his religion must yield to an otherwise valid exercise of state power needed to be determined in an adjudication in which religious hostility on the part of the state itself would not be a factor in the balance the state sought to reach. That requirement, however, was not met. Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sonia Sotomayor dissented. The two most liberal justices said they would have upheld the finding of the commission, which decided that Phillips violated the Colorado anti-discrimination law that bars businesses from refusing service based on race, sex, marital status, or sexual orientation. Mullins, so one is exercising his religious beliefs, right?
Mm-hmm.
But while doing so, he's discriminating against the gay couple. At what point are you not to inflict your religion on others? Mullen spoke to reporters on a conference call. I just hope that people can understand that this is not a wide-ranging ruling, he said, and that this doesn't mean that the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act has been invalidated in any way. We will continue fighting until no one has to endure the shame, embarrassment, and humiliation of being told we don't serve your kind here. The Attorney General Jeff Sessions said the First Amendment prohibits governments from discriminating against citizens on the basis of religious beliefs. The Supreme Court rightly concluded that the Colorado Civil Rights Commission failed to show tolerance and respect for Mr. Phillips' religious beliefs. Among liberal groups, the Human Rights Campaign, America's biggest LGBT civil rights organization, noted the limited frame of reference of the ruling. Chad Griffin, its president, said, in today's narrow ruling, the Supreme Court acknowledged that LGBT people are equal and have a right to live free from the indignity of discrimination. Anti-LGBT extremists did not win the sweeping license to discriminate they have been hoping for. So you had two issues that were going on. He was exercising his religious beliefs to choose not to serve them because homosexuality is against the religion.
Right.
But it's also discrimination at the same time.
For not serving them.
For not serving them.
Well, once you go public, you can't discriminate.
Yeah. So this one is another count.
So does a business owner have a right to resist to serve a person? Like Kim and I didn't want to serve.
Well, I'm thinking about no shoes and shirts that we've always seen for years.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I can see
That's
that.
unbiblical too, though,
Yeah,
because it's a poor person and you're going to discriminate against them.
Yeah, but how you can choose, you don't know the heart, right? but yeah, never mind. My mind just went that.
We don't serve these people and these people.
And they do have, and this one is one where he has a sign.
Oh,
Well,
wait,
then
when you're
it's
referring
illegal not to do it.
wait,
Whatever the
when you're
belief.
referring to like who is it true, who's really poor and who's really
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, I just want to make
But we
sure
don't have a right to determine.
I
whether or
know.
not they
I
really
just
are or
wanted to
not.
understand that way.
So there is, and I don't know if this is the same exact one, but the one that Parmenter uses is a circumstance where there's a sign outside that says that we don't serve homosexuals, okay? But the homosexual couple doesn't see the sign, and they go inside, and they proceed to try to order, and the waitress tells them that we don't serve, as Parmenter says, that we don't serve fags here. and they demand to see the what?
Sorry, I thought you were done. No, keep going.
And they demanded to see the owner or the manager because they wanted to have that waitress fired. So the owner or the manager comes over and he says, well, we have a sign outside. We don't serve your kind here.
Wow.
So go ahead, John.
My question is, I've had this before and Henry brought it up, and probably many of us have had it, is in regards to the church, obviously we don't have our doors closed to anybody. Anyone's welcome to come. But when it comes to an ordinance like baptism, or if it comes to an ordinance like marriage, where the pastor is now being required by law, or by constitutional law, and I'm not sure if that's the case or not, but to marry them or to baptize someone who is, let's say, for example, is a homosexual, where do...
The SDA church done it a couple of years ago.
No, I understand, but that was their choice. They decided they wanted to. They agreed with it. But for someone whose conscience says that I'm sorry, I love you, but I cannot marry the two of you because it goes completely against my faith. What do we do? What do we do in a situation?
As you're saying that, I'm thinking it through. That what is the purpose of baptism? It's to acknowledge you're a sinner and want to be saved by a redeemer.
But it also shows the world that you're no longer, it's a testimony to everybody that you're no longer living your old lifestyle, that you're now a new person in Christ Jesus.
So when it comes to being baptized, I mean, that's the purpose of baptism. I don't know
The
that.
issue is that they're redefining what the Word of God says in regards to homosexuality. So they do believe that they need to turn away from a life of sin, but they disregard homosexuality as a sin by their interpretation.
Yeah. Well,
So
that
then,
out at some point.
like is no,
What?
you gotta look.
Are you guys done?
Sorry, I was just pardon me, it just glitched out there. I didn't hear what you just said.
Oh, no, I didn't know if you were done because I think you glitched out too. Okay.
Wait, so sorry.
Go ahead.
So is the issue, Brother Jonathan, that you're trying to bring up is that when you marry, if a married couple were to go to a church to be married, and that pastor says that, well, that I can't marry you to because that goes against my faith. But if
Time.
Okay.
Because the state can't tell the church what to do, and the church can't tell the state what to do.
But then you run into the issue. What if the church was a church? What if it was a church that said no blacks allowed in here? They're not allowed to do that. The state has to step in because it's a constitutional right for anyone to enter that church. The state can't dictate what they preach in that church, as far as I understand. But you can't. Obviously, we're not going to put up a door saying no homosexuals. But when it comes to the ordinance, that's where I have the issue. Is because obviously we'd have our doors wide open to homosexuals or any sinner. We should. Some churches don't, obviously. But when it comes to the ordinance of having to perform the ordinance, that's where I get a little bit sticky. Is the state might say that they have to do it, but is that a violation of the Constitution? And then if the pastor doesn't want to marry them, is that not a violation of the Constitution? I don't understand how to interpret it there.
Well, you're not alone, I don't think. But I do think what Sister Adriana is a good point.
A marriage is a religious service.
It's a religious service, and so, but a religious service also involves going and getting a license,
Yes,
which is a civil
state.
And
Yeah,
so,
yeah, you have
so
to
they're
get
kind of
your
mingled, and so I don't know. I don't know.
But that's to get acknowledged by the state is the legal state license part of it. But you're married before God by a pastor here.
Yeah.
I know that in the Catholic Church, if one of the spouses were not Catholic, they could not get married in that church.
That's true, right?
If what?
If you're not Catholic.
Yeah, that was the same thing with Meghan and Prince Meghan and Prince Harry.
Prince Harry and Meghan.
Yeah, and Meghan, because she was not a Roman. She was Catholic, but she wasn't a Roman Catholic or something like
Roman
that.
Catholic.
Yeah, Roman. There was a difference, and so she had to be baptized or go through the ceremonial rites to, I guess, consent that she is a part of that religion now, so that she can be able to marry.
We have the same thing in
Prince
SDA. It's more
Yeah.
correct if your spouse is so really quick, just get baptized. and
Yeah,
married.
It doesn't make you an SDA.
It doesn't.
So,
Yeah.
okay, so this one here is Oklahoma restaurant owner says he doesn't want, and you'll see the derogatory words there. A restaurant in Enid is getting heat after one of its patrons posted a pretty strong message on social media about discrimination. The restaurant and bar has been open for more than 4 decades and carries quite the reputation. We want to warn you, this story does feature some graphic language. We'll just zip over those parts. Gary James, owner of Gary's Chicaro, said, I've been in business 44 years. I think I can spot a freak or a fag. He added, I don't deal with these people walking down the street with no jobs on welfare. James said, if I reached over there and slapped you, you should be offended. But to call someone a chink or someone call me a bigot, that doesn't bother me. Now, a wave of comments on Facebook claims James refuses to serve African Americans, Hispanics, and people with disabilities like Matt Guard. Guard said he doesn't like certain people of race, color, or ethnicity. Guard was a regular at Gary's Chicaro's restaurant for years. He said he turned a blind eye to the owner's choice of customers until recently. Guard said now he tried to find a weak excuse not to let me in with my wheelchair, or the weak excuse of having loud people with me. After getting turned away for a steak dinner, Guard said it's about his disability. James claimed that's not the case. James said he created an issue. You only have one time here. You create an issue, and you're out forever. Guard and at least 140 others posted on a Facebook page that said James' attitude had crossed the line to discrimination. Even the business t-shirt is viewed as offensive. The shirt features derogatory slogans against homosexuals that has the N-word on the front and threatens violence against Muslims, minorities, and Democrats. Now, that's your personal life, but this is a restaurant.
It is, but then if you notice, this gets into that sticky area of a fight between the right and the left over, is it the old saying that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me? Or is it that words are offensive and they do hurt and cause psychological damage and you shouldn't? Exactly. But the right is saying, like Mr. Gary over here says, that if I slap you, that's bad. That's physical damage. That should hurt you and you should be mad. But if I say words, that shouldn't bother you at all. So that's his defense for saying what he says. See what I'm saying? That's their defense for being able to be racist. But the problem is when you let words like that come in, then you get into threatening violence against different groups also. That's where it leads
Cause
to.
and effect.
Exactly.
So James said he's proud to wear that shirt. He said, I really don't want gays around. Any man that would compromise his own body would compromise anything. Guard said the people who still go back and patronize his business are condoning his behavior in how he treats others. James said, well, if you work, you own a business, pay your taxes, you're more than welcome here. If you're on welfare, stay home and spend my money there. Strong words in a small town where no one has challenged his business practices. The Office of Civil Enforcement is a division of the Oklahoma Attorney General's which investigates cases of discrimination. So that's one, looking at it, okay?
Wait, you didn't read that last line.
No, I
did
didn't. You can, it was just
Can you
locating who they are.
email it to us?
It is, I did email it.
It's not in.
Yeah, it's in the
The email for today, it's got everything.
The Word document.
It's attached. It's attached to the email. So you know how she usually puts like the SAP with the.
It's called
PowerPoint
equality.
SAP.
Look at the Word document called
Yeah.
equality.
Yeah.
So the next one that's mentioned is Jim Crow laws. If everybody knows about Jim Crow, they were state and local laws that enforced racial segregation in the southern United States. All were enacted in the late 19th and early 20th centuries by Democratic nominated state legislatures after the Reconstruction period. The laws were enforced until 1965. In practice, Jim Crow laws mandated racial segregation in all public facilities in the states of the former Confederate States of America and other states starting in the 1870s and 1880s, and were upheld in 1896 by the U.S. Supreme Court's separate but equal legal doctrine for facilities for African Americans, established with the court's decision in the case of Plessy versus Ferguson. Moreover, public education had essentially been segregated since its establishment in most of the South after the Civil War.
And they weren't equal. It says
right, we're going to
separate
see
but
that.
equal, but
right.
sorry.
Well, I
my
bet you
education.
there's going to be a moment where Sister Tess connects this Ferguson case with our Ferguson case, because they have to match, because it's a racism issue also.
Yeah, it's all great.
And she talks about separate but equal.
Slavery.
Yeah, but the word's Ferguson, because they attach different things. Back here you have it, here you have it. And you have a Ferguson case here that allows slavery, and then you have a Ferguson case here that I think they ruled not to press charges, so they allowed slavery.
Yeah. Oh, I see what you're talking about. Yeah. I know what you're talking
So the
about.
legal principle of separate but equal racial segregation was extended to public facilities and transportation, including the coaches of interstate trains and buses. Facilities for African Americans and Native Americans were consistently inferior and underfunded compared to the facilities for white Americans. Sometimes there were no facilities for people of color. As a body of law, Jim Crow institutionalized economic, educational, and social disadvantages for African Americans and other people of color living in the South. Jim Crow laws, sometimes, as in Florida, part of state constitutions, mandated the segregation of public schools, public places, and public transportation, and the segregation of restrooms, restaurants, and drinking fountains for whites and blacks. The U.S. military was already segregated. President Woodrow Wilson, a Southern Democrat, initiated segregation of federal workplaces in 1913. These Jim Crow laws revived principles of the 1865 and 1866 Black Codes, which had previously restricted the civil rights and civil liberties of African Americans. Segregation of public state-sponsored schools was declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court of the United States in 1954 in Brown versus the Board of Education. In some states, it took many years to implement this decision. Generally, the remaining Jim Crow laws were overruled by the Civil Rights Acts of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, but years of action and court challenges have been needed to unravel the many means of institutional discrimination. So they were separate but equal, meaning that they were all entitled to drink water, but they had their own fountain to drink from. That's the basis behind this, and the little picture down there shows it too, that they were to be segregated, but have the same opportunities. But anyways, they were generally given inferior facilities. Separate but equal was a legal doctrine in the United States constitutional law, according to which racial segregation did not violate the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution, which guaranteed equal protection under the law to all people. Under the doctrine, as long as the facilities provided to each race were equal, state and local governments could require that services, facilities, public accommodations, housing, medical care, education, employment, and transportation be segregated by race, which was already the case throughout the states of the former Confederacy. The phrase was derived from Louisiana law of 1890, although the law actually used the phrase equal but separate. The doctrine was confirmed in the Plessy versus Ferguson Supreme Court decision of 1896, which allowed state-sponsored segregation. Though segregation laws existed before that case, the decision emboldened segregation states during the Jim Crow era, which had commenced in 1876 and supplanted the Black Codes, which restricted the civil rights and civil liberties of African Americans during the Reconstruction era. In practice, the separate facilities provided to African Americans were rarely equal. Usually, they were not even close to equal or did not exist at all. For example, in the 1930s census, Black people were 42% of Florida's population. Yet, according to the 1934-36 report of the Florida Superintendent of Public Instruction, The value of white school property in the state was $70 million, while the value of African American school property was $4.9 million. The report says that in a few South Florida counties, and in most North Florida counties, many Negro schools are housed in churches, shacks, and lodges, and have no toilets, water supply, desks, blackboards, etc. Counties use these schools as a means to get state funds, and yet these counties invest little or nothing in them. At that time, that's interesting too. At that time,
Why is it interesting?
well, because they get the money for it, but if I'm understanding it correctly, they're not using it for.
They're not giving it back because the more schools you have, you can say we have this many schools, and
they allot you so much money.
The government has to give you an amount of money, and then the money that they get, they don't give it distributed evenly between the schools, between black and white schools. They just give it disproportionately to white schools.
Oh, I get that,
Yeah.
but I wanted to
that's
expand on that.
She just did.
I think that's all she was.
I know, I understood.
At that time, high school education for African Americans was provided in only 28 of Florida's 67 counties. In 1930 to 40, the average salary of a white teacher in Florida was $1,148, whereas for a Negro teacher, it was $585. During the era of segregation, the myth was that the races were separated but were provided equal facilities. No one believed it. Almost without exception, black students were given inferior buildings and instructional materials. Black educators were generally paid less than were white counterparts and had more students in their classrooms. In 1938, Pompano white schools collectively had one teacher for every 25 students, while the Pompano colored school had one teacher for every 54 students. At the Hammondville school, the single teacher employed there had 67 students. The doctrine of separate but equal was overturned by a series of Supreme Court decisions, starting with Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. However, the overturning of segregation laws in the United States was a long process that lasted through much of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, involving federal legislation, especially the Civil Rights Act of '64 in many court cases. So you can change we're out of time. You can change the way in which people are going to treat each other. I'm trying to think of the right way to say this. If you're a child growing up and this is what you grew up and that's all you know, eventually that just becomes what you are and what you are. So here we are in our lives now, and there's two kind of purposes in this. And this was a study I kind of threw together at the last minute, so it may not be real organized, but when it comes to the no buy and sell and the persecution that goes on and the fairness and the equality, that we're going to come to a point in time where there's no buying and selling. We're told that there would be a decree, no buying and selling, but is that what it looks like? And maybe it does come to that point where there's a decree or a law. But it's really when you have a tyrant or a despotism, right? That is, Sister Christina and I and Leonard were talking about it, where with the mass shootings and such, there's both sides of the fence saying that Trump causes it to happen. Depends on what side of the fence you're on, okay? I believe his behavior, having been a parent, that your behavior is going to set the patterns and behaviors of your children. And so when you have a parent that is acting a certain way and doing certain things, good or bad, then the child is going to do too. So when you have this tyrant who thinks he's above the law and has is working on achieving absolute power, but his actions are, I can't think of the right words to put it. He's the cause, and the effect is the ones that go out and do the shootings. Is that the best way to say it?
So it's one of the last two shootings. The guy that killed all those people, supposedly there is a website for violent people where they can go and express their violence. He went on that website and he actually put one of the quotes from Trump.
Yeah.
So
when it comes to he causes all men, right? it doesn't necessarily have to mean, and maybe it will at some point, but we're already seeing the ones that we read about the baker, we're already seeing how people are treating others based on their own attitudes and beliefs and opinions and what is, trying to think of the right words to say it.
Or influence?
Influence, yes.
Example is a good way.
Yeah, yeah.
Example.
So when it comes to right now, homosexuality is one that is a battle. There are others, and the other one that he brings up is Romania and the Gypsies. You would probably understand that more, that the Gypsies are really poorly treated in Romania, correct? Okay.
Wait, can I?
Okay, I don't know. I'm just telling you, it's brought up, so you can go back to the presentation and watch it yourself.
Sorry, what were the Gypsies? Like, I have some knowledge, but like, are they?
Let's discuss that at lunch.
Okay, sorry.
So, because we're going to have to break and go to lunch.
That's going to be a controversial issue.
So I'm only saying that he's bringing up the different.
Comes close to home.
Yeah, it comes close to home. So, but what it's not about who and what, it's about what causes it. And so when we come into the point where the Sabbath is an issue, and you've got this group of people that are exercising their religion, that it's not necessarily take a law to cause you to not buy and sell. We could wind up in a restaurant and the finger has been pointed at Sabbath keepers by the dictator, right?
Yeah.
So you're in a restaurant wanting to go and order food, or you're going to the grocery store and want to buy in your food, and you can't buy your food because the people there are saying, we're not serving your kind. So we look at it from the gay perspective as probably, I don't want to speak for everybody, but we might think, yeah, that's true. You know, they're being sinners. They're this, they're this, they're this. But it's not about that. It's about their equal rights as citizens. And it's about our equal rights as citizens. So for us to say anything about this, the stories of the situations of the examples of the gays not being able to go into a restaurant or not be able to order their wedding cake, the same thing is going to be pointed at us. And it'll not be necessarily by a law.
Right.
And like I said, it could come to that. It may come to that, but Adventism is waiting for a law.
Right. But it could, I get what you're saying. It could just be from people's choice to say, no, so-and-so worshipers here. Because when we get lifted up as an enzyme, there's going to be more awareness of this movement, of this group of people who's, causing all this trouble, stirring up. I mean, that's what it's going to lead to, but I'm not saying that when we do get lifted up, that it's going to be seen as that way. I'm just saying that progressively, we're going to become this odd movement that's just, and they don't see it that way, but it's empowered by God to speak this gospel truth. And there's going to be many rejectors, and there's going to be people saying, no, we don't want to hear this. If you are not allowed in our restaurant, you are not allowed in our stores, you're not allowed here, there, wherever, and that prevents us from being able to buy and sell, because
nobody wants to do business with us.
Exactly.
They don't want to serve our kind.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
It's just, go ahead.
Sorry, Sister Lane. I just wanted to toss out a couple of thoughts, sort of questions. Did anyone see anything further? I'm thinking back to one of the French School of the Prophets videos. Sister Tess made a comment in discussion about homosexuality, and she said something along the lines of, she believes we need to relook at Sodom and Gomorrah. Mm-hmm. And then she stated she believes there were more sins going on there. There was more going on there than just homosexuality.
Yeah, but what you guys were talking about was the homosexuality, but I think there had to be something with the religion going on when we were talking about that, because it has to match the United States. So something, it was, I think the religion, we have to look, yeah, when you guys were talking about.
What happened? I missed it. I was focusing on the
I'll
chat.
let Sister Debbie say that again.
Let's let Sister Debbie finish her comment. We'll pray, we'll break, and then if everybody wants, we'll finish this and then do the next Brazil class.
Yeah, I do.
Okay. So go ahead, Sister Debbie.
Just to recap, Sister Tess in one of the French prophecy school messages had stated, She believes we need to relook at Sodom and Gomorrah as a movement, that she believed there's more operating there than merely homosexuality.
Oh yeah, that's
Second,
what I mentioned earlier.
second thing I wanted to ask or mention about, and then maybe a question. Elder Thibault in Lacombe, Alberta, made mention in one of our meetings a while back now, but in terms of homosexuality, fully equal, but when it came to baptism, and this, Brother Jonathan, is sort of echoing your remarks a few minutes back, when it came to baptism, not his words, but he basically said that's where we draw the line. And I know even as he said it, and we didn't sort of discuss it further that meeting, but I know even since, I've sort of been weighing out a little bit. It's a heart work God is wanting to do in us, setting us all free, having us unlearn things that we even, Sister Elaine, some of the things you were just reading about there. I mean, we've all been influenced by our upbringings, by, our belief system as we've thought we've seen things correctly and so on as Seventh-day Adventists in years past. And I'm just wondering, is there a little bit of a hypocrisy there? Like if we as present truth movement people, priests or whatever, end up saying, yeah, we fully accept homosexuals and, yada, 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 but, and now I have to go to Seventh-day Adventist churches, but in a Seventh-day Adventist church, you're not going to be married by us there, or you're not going to be baptized. And granted, I think all of us are aware of the moral stipulations in Scripture, but at the same time, I'm still wrestling a little with this distinction between moral and prophetic. And to me, in a sense, is it really stating that people are really equal, equal before the law and so on? If we say, you can attend our church, you can sit with us, you can fellowship with us, et cetera, but we draw the line at, and in essence, then just simply echo what other Sunday-keeping churches, Catholics, whoever else, are all saying. I could foresee that some of those very same people would turn around and say, well, you're like all the others. In fact, you're even worse because you sort of led us along to believe that you really believe we're equal, but now you're dumping us, you're cutting us off. So just some thoughts I was having, and, as all of us are wrestling through some of the new perspectives and the new light, just things to keep in mind.
I believe it's all meant to strip us down of any hypocrisy that might.
That's right, Sister Lane. I agree. And I know I'm one of the offenders that God is really having to sort out.
He's looking at it as lost and saved, not gypsies, not blacks, not homosexuals.
That's right.
Looking at it as lost and saved, and he wants us to look at it. Let's we got 2 questions, and then we got to go for lunch, or we're going to be way late. So Lana or Adriana, who's first?
I don't have a question.
Oh, okay.
Sister
Lana.
Lana.
Sister Lana.
Hi, I had in Ezekiel 16:49, now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and the needy. I guess this is something that really, I think is very powerful, because it really destroys the Bible actually doesn't give a definition of what was the sin of Sodom. All these ideas, I mean, I mean, it's obvious that they had other sexual practices, but why it was destroyed? Was it really the sexual practice or was it the violence?
It was the vileness in that, and it was all of it. It was
This quote from Ellen White.
And it comes from idleness.
It says, the cities of today are fast becoming like Sodom and Gomorrah. This is in the chat. The many holidays encourage idleness, the exciting sports, theater going, horse racing, gambling, liquor drinking, and reveling stimulate every passion of intense activity. The youth are swept away by the popular current. Those who learn to love amusement for its own sake open the door to a flood of temptations. They give themselves up to social gaiety and thoughtless mirth. And their intercourses with pleasure lovers has an intoxicating effect upon the mind. They are led on from one form of dissipation to another until they both the desire and the capacity for a life of usefulness, until both the desire and capacity for a life of usefulness is lost. Their religious aspirations are chilled, their spiritual life is darkened, all the nobler faculties of the soul, all that link man with the spiritual world are debased. So it was not just that because that's what we saw in Lot, that was just like a symptom, but the problem was
idleness and pleasure loving.
Idleness and pleasure loving.
And she links it back to the holidays, all the holidays and amusements.
Yeah,
Yes.
theater and everything.
Yes.
And I can look at my history of all the family events we've done on holidays. It was all fun to get together and have all this and so
I
yeah.
have no idea why that holiday is there. It's just thinking of food
Oh,
and
yeah.
having fun.
And then my coworkers, when I tell them I don't care, when I tell my coworkers I don't care about any holidays, they look at me like I'm the quackiest person on the face of the earth. Like, how do you not like holidays? Don't you love your family? What's wrong with you? I'm like,
Yeah.
Stay connected with family.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, let's pray and we'll have lunch. Brother Francisco, would you like to pray and then also bless the food?
Yeah, well, okay. We thank you, Holy Father, for this beautiful Sabbath day you've given us. Thank you for your holy presence and also your Holy Spirit. We enjoy the Sabbath day each and every week, and we look forward to it, Lord. And we thank you for providing for your children always. As we sit down to enjoy this bounty you've also provided, we ask for your blessing of the food, and may it bless our bodies, the minds, all for your power and your glory. In the name of Yeshua, through the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.